Well, I promised that I was going to be telling stories about woo and deep spirituality, but then as the year progressed, I discovered that the whole spiritual community has gone completely cray cray. And so today I have an update on what's been happening with me on memoir writing, and I have a book review. So join me. It's going to be cray cray. Well, hello and welcome to Storybridge. This is your host, Patty Lucia, and it's been a while. I have been very much involved in a few projects. One kind of came by surprise, and it wasn't really my project. It's a documentary that I was approached about to get involved in, and it's a documentary about a woman who I knew through my cafe during the years that I owned my cafe, and a woman known as Miss Cleo, who she passed in 2016, and we had a friendship over the period of time that I owned my cafe, and in my memoir, I wrote a story about that friendship. The makers of the documentary heard about this story that I had written and contacted me and wanted to know more about it. So I ended up being interviewed for the documentary, and was very much involved in finding people in the area who were involved with Cleo in one way or the other, and had found her, had met her, had befriended her through the cafe that I used to own. So that was all quite an experience. That documentary is due out in December, I believe. And I think it will be through HBO Max. And the title of that documentary is, the working title at this moment is Call Me Miss Cleo. It's not a title that I like. I wish they had come up with another title. It just doesn't seem to speak to the woman that I know. One of the reasons why, I think the main reason why I decided to get involved in this documentary was because for years and years, the story about Miss Cleo has been a bit distorted, and the public has believed what the media put out there, that she had stolen money. Many people believe she was in jail, that she had basically stolen money from people who had called a hotline, and she was not the one stealing money. It was the owners of this company who seemed to have been able to kind of slip away without much notice when what happened was she ended up being the one on the front pages of newspapers and in the news as the criminal, when in fact she was not. And unfortunately, when she was exonerated, it was there was very little said about it. So to this day, most people believe that she was a criminal. So the documentary, it was my hopes that in participating in this documentary, that some of that could be laid to rest finally, and the public view of this woman would be somehow impacted by the documentary. That is yet to be seen. You never know what people are going to do in the edit room. Very recently, there was, for those of you who are familiar with the spiritual teacher Teal Swan, she had a documentary crew follow her around for, I think, nearly 3 years wanting to capture the work that she does in the spiritual community. And they were the camera people, the director, all of them were became her friends and the friends of the people in her group, the people who were her staff, are her staff. And so they were very excited. Teal and her team were very excited about this documentary that was going to come out. And unfortunately, what happened in the edit room, and there's still hardly any explanation for it, but what happened in the edit room was really quite dramatic. They completely turned it around. They super edited things to make it seem like Teal was manipulating and literally putting people in danger. So it was kind of a scathing documentary about Teal Swan, even though the crew, the director, everyone, while they were going through this project, were very, very positive and impacted personally by the work of Teal. So, and this was all very, very genuine. There was no reason for Teal to believe that the documentary that was going to come out months later would be sending out a dramatically different message than what they were filming. But like I said, there are all kinds of things that happen in the edit room, and sometimes we have no idea who's behind it. Whose idea was it to completely turn this story around and send out a message that was so distorted and disparaging of Teal Swan? So whatever you think about Teal, whether you follow her or not, because we're all flawed in our own ways. And Cleo was a flawed person. We all are. We're human. However, Cleo was not this evil grifter, and Teal Swan is not this reckless damager, and destroyer of human lives. And so I am hoping that they don't do with this documentary what was done with the documentary about Teal Swan. It does seem like a little bit of an agenda when you think about it. It's like, let's just rip to shreds these spiritual folks who are giving people hope in the world. It's almost like, let's look for people who are giving folks hope in the world, and let's just squash the shit out of them, right? And let's make them look like dangerous, shit tards to the masses, so that we can impact their impact. And so, I mean, and I would say at this point, oh, I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but kind of fuck it. I kind of don't care if it sounds like that, because there are just way too many things that make you kind of go, And I think if there are all kinds of things that are making you kind of go, you have every right to go, that doesn't add up. We have every right to acknowledge when things don't add up. So I have been involved in this documentary. It is due out in December on HBO Max, and I believe the title of it, or at least the working title at this moment, is Call Me Miss Cleo. And so we'll see what happens with the editing process and what actually ends up on film. So that is one project. Another project that I've been involved in has been, it's somewhat inspired by the project with the documentary, is a novel. It is my first novel. I'm very excited about it, though really, really nervous about it, because writing a novel is very different than, say, writing a memoir that is a collection of short stories. And so the short story form has always been my preferred form. It's always been pretty much what I what I write. So this was my first novel endeavor. I had to really climb a very steep learning curve. I listened to a lot of lectures. I took some courses in how to format a novel. There's a lot to it. There are a lot of moving parts. But I have to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed learning the process. I really loved learning the process, and I'm hoping that the novel that I put out this year, I think it'll be out in December as well, will be hopefully a decent novel that's enjoyable for people to read. The title of my novel is Perilous and Beautiful, and it's a love story. And it's a what inspired this was, I realized that there were things that I didn't put in my memoir that were kind of more sensitive things that I left out. And I realized that there were pieces of my story that could be written in fiction form, and then I had to kind of create the framework for these kind of characters and this kind of telling of a story. And part of that is that one thing that I haven't really talked about in any of my writing, and actually I don't talk about it, is my experience with being in an abusive relationship. And this was not a physically abusive relationship. This was more of an emotional and psychologically abusive relationship. And so I thought that the novel format would be a way for me to write a story about a woman who breaks free of an abusive relationship. And so there's a lot more to the story. There is a collection of quirky and wonderful characters. And one of the things that I learned, I'm always learning that the writing process is such an extraordinarily developmental process. So there's the process of learning how to be a better writer, of course, but writing, after all, is an expression of who we are. And so it really calls into question, well, who am I? Who am I in this moment? And is that really who I am? And what have I learned? How am I different now than before? Is that really my story? And so it really pushes us to ask deeper questions as we write. And so this story, the telling of this story, has really pushed me to ask deeper questions about the choices in different periods of my life that I made, and the consequences of those choices. Because when you are developing a story, of course, it's all about the choices that your characters make and the consequences of those choices. And so when you have a character that's very close to who you are, then you cannot avoid the personal question of, what are the choices I have made? What are the consequences of those choices? How has that process changed me? And so that has been part of I think, the real growthful aspect of writing this novel. And also it probably has something to do with a little bit of my nervousness about putting it out, because even though it's fictional, there are some deeply personal aspects to this story, in particular with the main character. So Perilous and Beautiful centers around a main character. Her name is Bear. And the reason why she's named Bear is that's her spirit name given to her by her old Italian grandmother, who was a healer in the old country and quite a magical woman herself. had visions, saw things, healed people, and was ostracized herself because of that. And so the main character, her Nonya, was somebody who gave her the name Bear because she saw a bear spirit who walked with her, and so she called her Little Bear. And so the main character's name remains Bear throughout the story, both Bear and Orsa, which is Italian for bear. But she breaks free of this abusive relationship and throws herself into this cafe project that she has, and at some point, her whole life revolves around keeping that alive. And so why is that? Why is that what she wants? And what has she sacrificed for that? Along the way, meets some really incredible people who are on their own journeys. And honestly, most of the characters in this story are searching, though they don't realize it, and Bear certainly doesn't realize it through much of the story. They are really in search of family, reconnecting with family, finding family, creating family. And this story is very much about the primacy of family, and how the loss of family, whether it's through rejection or terrible loss, is a loss that people will look for their families for the rest of their lives. That it creates such a hole in one's life to have lost their family, however it is that it happened, that people search for it for the rest of their lives. And the book also explores what family is. Like, we talk about the family you're born into and the family you create. That's fine. But there's also an aspect in this book which explores soul family. So family that is family on a spiritual level. And so that's recognized when you come in contact. There is some kind of a feeling of reunion when you encounter soul family. And so the characters also have that experience, and Bear has that experience. And often it happens when we meet people that we're connected to on a soul level. Sometimes we see that as, well, this person needs to be my lover. And that isn't necessarily true. And so it's that age-old story about, like, twin flames. Do twin flames really need to be lovers? Most of the time, the answer would be no. For many reasons I won't get into here. But so Perilous and Beautiful is set by the ocean, and there's a lot of ocean metaphor, and I love that. And a lot of stuff about sea turtles, and because I love sea turtles, and things about, like, magical people, magical mystical people who come into your life, and they come in for a reason, and at that time you don't really know why, but there's a reason why people are entering your life and exiting your life. And when we're in the throes of it, sometimes we don't understand. And sometimes we have to lose absolutely everything for the best of what's going to come into our life to come. And so it's very much about that. It touches on all of those things. But ultimately, it is a love story, and it is a story about family, about creating family, healing family, and family reunion in many different ways, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So That's Perilous and Beautiful. This is my project, and it is due out in December. Hopefully, I'm in the throes. Actually, I'm doing this podcast today because I needed a break from editing. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm like in the throes of editing, and I've dedicated September to editing, and then I kind of take it as far as I can take it. And then in October, beginning of October, it goes to the professionals, and then they'll cut and they'll slice and dice it, and then send it back to me to make more corrections. But the whole point is to really, my goal is to have it out in December. So we'll see how that goes. But you can visit my website on updates like that, because there are characters in this book that are based on people that I know and love dearly. I will be doing a kind of a series of podcasts and little uh, live streams, in which I speak to some of the people in my life who were inspirations for the characters that arrive in this book. So that's kind of an exciting aspect of that for me, and it's been really wonderful writing some of the people that I love so much in my life, writing them into this story in fictionalized characters. That has been a real joy for me. So that is Perilous and Beautiful, due out in December. And I'll be, kind of updating people on that as I go. Next year, I've got 2 more books in the queue. I do have a short story that is currently a finalist in a short story contest for the fall. So we'll see if I win an award for Squirrel Wars. Squirrel Wars is a short story that I wrote when I returned from my visit up north in Massachusetts, to spend about a month with my mom and my family. And I had some interesting experiences up there, as one does when one spends about a month with family. And when I returned, I wrote Squirrel Wars, which is it's comical, and it's a cute little short story. I do have it on my website, so if you're interested in checking out Squirrel Worlds, what do you say, Squirrel Worlds? That's actually a good title, but Squirrel Wars, because it really is about war in more ways than one in that story. But again, it is a humorous romp, and so I'm a finalist in the short story contest put out through Onyx Literary Magazine. So I'm very excited about that. So I wanted to, that is the update on that. So in 2023, I have 2 more books that that I am working on, namely This Amazing Body, which continues to chronicle my journey towards optimal health in my postmenopausal years, which is, oh boy, there's just so much to say about that. What I wanted to do today, though, is I also wanted to talk about a book that I read recently. I try to read a lot, but and this is a book that was written about memoir writing. And so, I've written a memoir, and that was my first book, and that's also available on my website, if you haven't checked that out already. A collection of short stories, a little whimsical, but Wildflowers and Present Tenses is the title of my memoir. So I was interested to see what this particular author had to say. It was a book that was recommended to me by a young friend, and and a lot of times I know that my age shows sometimes in my opinions and sensibilities about different things, and particularly politics. Anything having to do with politics, often I find that I am, I'm kind of living on another world sometimes, than some of the younger people that I know. And I find that in surprising ways, I'm more radical than they are. Like I question more things than they do. And so I find that bizarre and ironic that I question more than most of the millennials I know. I'm like, what are you, why would you just accept that? Well, because it's okay. So I don't know what that's about. It could be, because I was born in a different generation that was really all about questioning. And there are people who say that's about astrological alignment. You guys were born with like Neptune in a place and this in a place, and it just made you rebellious and questioning. Your whole generation is about that. That's not where the millennials are coming from. They're kind of more, accepting and they don't question. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, it's hard for me to believe that it's just astrology, but I don't negate it either, I don't, because it's a big complex world out there. And there are so many factors as to why we as individuals or as generations, kind of function the way we function. But I really wanted to include this in today's podcast. And this book is called Bodywork by Melissa Febos. All right. So Bodywork by Melissa Febos. Now, she is bisexual, I think. And she's written some other books. And of course, she is highly touted as like this wonderful cutting edge writer. And so this book is dedicated to memoir writing, particularly people in marginalized communities writing their memoir, and basically what she sees as a resistance to us writing our memoirs. I'm not really, like, I'll be honest with you, when I decided to write my memoir, I just fucking wrote it. I don't mean to be like out, I'm sorry for the cursing, but honestly, I mean, maybe it has to do with my generation. You want to fucking do something, do it. Don't sit around and bellyache about who's going to say bad things about it. Of course, people are going to say bad things about it. Of course, people are going to be like, yeah, that's stupid, whatever. People are going to say all kinds of things. The thing of it is if you want to do something, if you want to write a memoir, if you want to write your story, then do it. Put your grown-up panties on and freaking write it. So that's kind of my attitude. And so the reason why I'm kind of beginning there is because she spends a lot of time in this book talking about how hard it is to write a memoir if you're in a marginalized community. And there's so much pushback, and it has to do with, the usual stuff. People who are, a system that's transphobic and white supremacist and oh my God, all of these, I wish you had grown up in my generation, sissy boom. Really? You want, honestly, really? So I think we've come a long way. Anyway, am I being too harsh? I might be. Maybe I'm being too harsh. All right. So here, I just want to share some of the things, she does say some good things about writing memoir in the writing process. See, the writing, I believe this is where we agree. Maybe I should start there. Maybe I should have started there. We both agree that the writing process is a healing process. I've talked about it a lot. So when you write your story, you are also healing your story, because in that self-reflective process, as you are going through, you are asking yourself the hard questions, because you are now a character in your book. And so if you were writing fiction, you're asking the same questions of your protagonist. And so if you're writing a memoir, the same questions you would ask a protagonist, you are asking yourself. And so you need to be self-reflective. This is my story. How do I want to tell it? How honest am I going to be? Right? So what, and if there are things I want to leave out, Why? Is that something that's unhealed? Should I take the time to work on that a bit before I write, or should I just write the best I can and include as much as I can, knowing that there are still places that are unhealed that I just can't write about yet? All right. And that's also fine. So I want to just share a couple of things with you, just a few little things. You can see, like, I'm going to show you, if you got the video on, you're going to see that, I kind of really I marked the crap out of it. So, but here, let me just share with you, an excerpt and then kind of my comments, because I wrote all over the margins here. Those who benefit from the inequities of our society resist the stories of people whose suffering is in large part owed to the structures of our society. They do not want to have to change. We see this in 1,000 forms of white fragility, male fragility, transphobic, homophobic tantrums, protesting the ground gained by trans and queer storytellers. Well, that was an awful lot. This is what I wrote in the margins. We gain nothing from these labels, but more separation, even if the statement is true. So what do we gain with the terms and the labels white fragility, male fragility, transphobic, homophobic, tantrums? What do we gain by that? And who the fuck cares if someone's having a tantrum? I learned a long time ago that what you do with tantrums is you ignore them. So if it's really a tantrum, whether it's by a child or by an adult, you fucking ignore it and you go about your business. Or that just could be me and the attitude of my generation. I'll give you that. But honestly, I also wrote, memoirs can be self-published. What's stopping us? So my thing is, if you are looking to the main publishing companies, most books today are self-published. So if you are writing a book and you're getting pushback, or you fear pushback from the major 5 publishing companies, I think they're now going down to 4 or 3, and that is really difficult. It is difficult for a wide spectrum of people to get published in those publishing houses. But if you're concerned because you're a marginalized person, you're going to get pushback from a publishing house, then you fucking self-publish. One way or the other, you tell your story, you tell it as best you can, you put it in a book, and you put it out there. Maybe I'm just not sophisticated enough in my thinking. Maybe I'm just not at the level of an intellectualism as she is. But then again, wouldn't that be elitist? Think about that. All right. So I found myself reading through and just trying to find the places where she's getting to the good stuff. Like, let's just freaking talk about the healing process of writing and the importance of writing memoir and all of that. Here we go. Here's more. Ongoing, oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Is subject to the re-traumatization. So if you're writing about your trauma and people push back against it, then you're re-traumatized. By the ongoing perpetrators. So those structures, those sexist structures, those homophobic structures, those transphobic, whatever, label structures that are pushing back on you, well, that's just going to trigger you and re-traumatize you. The patriarchal, white supremacist, colonizing nations in which they must live and learn to heal. So it's really hard for us to heal from these traumas because these systems have caused our trauma, and now we're living in a system that supports these systems. So how can we possibly heal in this environment? How can we possibly heal? And I just wrote, you cannot look to them for healing. You can only look to yourself. It's an inside job, sweetie. It has nothing to do with them. Because if you're really going to heal your trauma, it's about self-acceptance, self-love, self-forgiveness. That journey, that inward journey, that dark night of the soul, sweetie pie. It's not about looking to them. It's never been about looking to them. Because to the extent that you look to them, do you not continue to validate their perspective? So if we live in reaction and anger towards those structures that oppress us, then are we not giving our focus and our energy to the very structures? It doesn't, you see how that's a circle fuck? So in some ways you have to step out of the structure and you have to focus on your own self-reflection, your own healing. But if you are stuck in a reality that is only structured around the framework of oppressed and oppressor, you will never heal. There's no room in that structure for healing either, sweetie pie. There's no room. There's only another reason to be angry at someone, to blame someone. And that victimization will never get you empowered or healed. Healing, empowerment is an inside job. It has nothing to do with the structures outside. Let me just continue on here. Here we go. Here's another one. Social justice has always depended upon the testimonies of the oppressed. We cannot fully acknowledge the harms of patriarchy without a subsequent women's liberation movement, just as we cannot fully acknowledge the harms and continued existence of white supremacist structures in our society without an anti-racist civil rights movement. We cannot fully acknowledge the harms committed against the LGBTQI, XYZ, etc. people without a queer liberation movement. So basically what she's saying is your memoir, like the valid in her mind, I guess, the memoirs that really matter or mean anything are associated with social justice. If you are not framing your memoir, if you are in a marginalized community and you write your story or your memoir, it has to be framed like this, right? In order for you to heal. Every time I hear the word social justice, I cringe. I cringe. These are the people who shout and scream like maniacs. These are the people who dox people. These are the people who are behind the cancel movement. So much anger, so much energy about revenge. It's revenge energy. It's anger. What? Really? And that's going to heal the world? If you want people to treat other humans like humans, then you have to humanize the people who have been dehumanized, not dehumanize the people who have had ignorance. And so long as we continue to be in that cycle, we will never build the bridges that we need to build. So we have an enormous amount of healing to do. I believe in the power of writing and language to heal, to build bridges. And I also get quite concerned about how language is used to tear bridges down, to create separation between people, and oftentimes separation that didn't exist before, but now exists because the language has been poisoned. Don't counter dehumanization with dehumanization. This is where we've come. So I think I agree with Melissa Febos on the power of memoir writing. I think that people should do it. Tell your stories. I don't think that you have to look for validation from the big the big corporate publishing companies. You can just write your story and get it out there. I don't think that people need to look for validation from people that they think are oppressing them. You don't need to look for any validation from anyone but yourself. If you want to heal, it's an inside job. We need to ask ourselves the hard questions. We do not need to face outward and demand that the world adjust to our experience of trauma in the world. So if we want to build bridges, then we create ways that we can find commonality between our story and other people's stories. So we write our stories in ways that build bridges, that don't point fingers. And so I just can't stress that enough. As much as I do respect Melissa Febos's perspective on the power, the healing power of writing, and in particular, writing your story, writing your memoir, I completely disagree with her that we should put it in the framework of social justice. Just write your story, because you, as beautiful, unique creations, have amazing stories that have value in themselves. Tell your story. You don't have to pick up a battle or fight a crusade to tell your story. You just have to tell your story. That's what you and every human who has ever lived on this planet has in common. We all have stories. Unique, beautiful, wonderful, funny, tragic. We all have stories. That's what we all have in common. Tell yours, write yours.